All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the latest installment of the IO Pop-Up Community Speaker Series. Tonight, we are pleased and excited to have Hailey Johnson with us, who is going to speak with us. And I'm going to do a quick intro. I'm not going to steal her thunder and talk too much about what she's going to speak to you on, but I will give you a little bit of just a high level of Hailey because she's a wonderful, wonderful young lady, or at least young to me anyway. But it is what it is. Hailey is an engineering enablement consultant, which sounds really fancy. At and I can't even pronounce the name of the company. Nutanix, I think it is which is a global cloud software company where she supports learning, onboarding, and employee development initiatives for engineering teams around the world. She does hold a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology from Meredith College, and she enjoys translating IO psychology into practical workplace solutions, which of course we focus on. We want applied IO here. So throughout graduate school and her professional career, Hailey has been especially drawn to mentoring and peer mentoring and job shadowing because of the role relationships play in learning and career growth. Many of the opportunities that have shaped her own career have come through people who invested in her, inspiring a passion for creating those same experiences for others. She did recently join the Practitioner Mentoring Committee and enjoys exploring how organizations can intentionally build cultures of learning, connection, and knowledge sharing. And mentoring is actually a near and dear passion of mine. And I think it's a very, very important thing for our community, and that things we need to share with others. So I personally am very excited to hear what Hailey has to say. And so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it off to Hailey. So Hailey, please take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, Lee. But yeah, I am super excited to be speaking with you all today. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. Pretty much, you've heard who I am, engineering enablement consultant. Sounds fancy, but just like IO psychology, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, also sounds fancy. I do a lot of the same things I'm sure that you all do in your day to day. I recently finished my master's in industrial organizational psychology this past May, so I am fully prepped to be in the real world with all my academic prowess. But I'm really going to focus on talking about my practical experience and what I'm sharing with you today, because I believe that really holds the most weight. So it's something I always wanted to know while in school. I think it's something we all want to know even as employees in the real world, right? So wanting to share that in case anybody can learn from me and in case we can learn together. All right, so the why and the how. So mentoring is important for so many different reasons. The context that we operate in has changed a lot, especially post-COVID, more hybrid, different things. I mean, lots of different development and relationship building comes with costs, right? So mentoring is one thing that really just relies on the people. It can be very low cost when you do it effectively, and it really helps to kind of work within this situation and work for it to kind of help alleviate some of those pain points. So I have found peer mentoring as a strategic solution. So it's really overlaps on a lot of the different aspects you'll see later on, but it's truly individual and depends on the context. So I do have some basic research. Again, I'm wanting to touch more on the applied side, but in case you want the context, I wanted to share it. The resource-based view theory is one that I found super relevant. So human capital, as the world is changing and everything's becoming, more tech, humans are going to be more and more important, which I'm sure you all know, as well as leader member exchange theory. So that's relevant in the sense of, relationships have lots of outcomes and consequences. And there's ways to kind of get those to upward spiral and impact beyond just, 1 to 2. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But first, I wanted to go ahead and get you all engaged. I know it's late on a Tuesday. So if you want to go ahead and scan to join the Slido right here, and I want to hear what you think is a company's most valuable and hardest to replace resource. There we go, coming in. We have people, 100%. Awesome. Looks like we have one joining. Let me know if you're having any trouble as well. More people, awesome. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of us will be on the same page, right? But people are by far always what makes a company unique. Within globalization, everything's changing. We can all use the same tool, but the people really make it the difference. So here you can see we have brand. Obviously, lots of things are super important. But at the end of the day, the people are the base. So awesome. Great. And we'll shift to one more question. Um, since the shift for hybrid remote work, so whether you yourself work in that environment, wherever you've heard about others working in that environment, what do you think has changed most in how you learn at work? It's something we all have to deal with. Unfortunately, we keep learning, fortunately and unfortunately, right? The learning never stops. So yeah, yeah. Lots of all the above. I think people maybe selected one of the options, not seeing all the above. So fair. But yeah, so fewer spontaneous hallway conversations, right? I'm not interacting with, Jan from payroll as often. I don't know what my benefits are, what the time comes. If I want to know, I have to Slack or reach out or set up time on Zoom. So more fatigue from video calls going off that Zoom. So a lot of meetings, right? Trying to get all of that, which is awesome to have that interaction, but it comes with some costs. And in this structure, so a lot of shift in how we structure our companies has come to be flatter organization structures. So this means that managers are having to oversee more people. So we have a lot of technology that makes this possible, but with that means that there are fewer senior people available to mentor and that they typically have more responsibilities than maybe previous. Okay, last question. So I want you to think of a time you needed help at work and you didn't know who to ask. So if you can, how did that feel in one word? I think we've all been there. I'm sure it won't be the last time, but I think it's something that everyone experiences at some point. Frustrating. Yeah, most definitely. Especially in, whether it's a bigger community or a smaller company, there's probably someone that knows it, right? And if it's smaller, maybe there's not somebody that knows it, which is also frustrating. Worried, isolated, definitely, definitely. No one likes being on an island, right? Disappointing, yes, for sure. Overwhelmed, yeah. Alone, yep, alone, isolated, overwhelmed. I'm sure we feel that all a lot with lots of different so many things are being thrown at us, and not being able to get that support that you need definitely doesn't make it easier. So awesome. More on the frustrating. Perfect. So why does this matter? We've established kind of the base. You can see just from those polls, what the situation is, what our current context is that we're operating. But for me, mentoring matters so much. I'm naturally a relationships person. And I feel very lucky for that to be something that does come naturally to me, but it is not something that I do not put work towards. So it's definitely something I intentionally work towards, think about, plan for. But I've gotten to see those really just fruits, I guess, of the labor throughout my life. So growing up, I was a competitive cheerleader. You can see here. Um, Lots of mentors, peer mentors, normal mentors, teams of 36 girls, right? So learning all together. And I've carried that into my current role, my professional career, getting to break into the industrial organizational field, right? Even just HR field, people field, whatever it is, getting that first step in there can be super confusing if you don't have maybe somebody in your life that's done that. So for me, Daniela was super impactful and really helped me through that process of getting my foot in the door, finding my first job. And then once I've been in, my professional career, I think I've learned everything I've learned, every role I've gotten has been from my peers, right? Peers, managers, really my entire network has been so influential and has allowed me to learn so much and progress so much. So Ellen Chang is another example of that. Someone in my community or at my company that I was able to reach out to and just bounce ideas off, ask for advice. So I pride myself on being someone that does this very intentionally. I reach out first, I do the cold calls. I find something in common with people, right? I want to build that relationship. It's always authentic. But it's been really helpful, and that's why I'm wanting to share with you all today, is so that maybe you can take some of these learnings into your own life and network. Awesome. So, when I was thinking through mentoring and really putting together a mentoring program, um, I came up with the idea to compare it to my competitive cheerleading background. You really can compare it to any type of sport, team sport. But overall, to make a well-trained mentoring program, there's a few facets. So here we kind of have a visual. So it starts at tryouts, right? Tryouts for us are always around June. It goes all the way to the World Championship competition. So that's your end goal. That's in April. So it's a year-long process, year-long season. But in order to start out strong, right, you have to build your team, you're planning your stunt groups, who's going to work well together. You're establishing a goal, right? You're already knowing, okay, we want to, improve on our skills in this aspect, and we want to get this many championships. And you go into it with a clear mind. You also realize that one team does not mean one style. So throughout the season, you're taking different approaches, right? You're learning your teammates, you're learning your athletes, what they need to be successful, what they lack in, what they bring to the table, right? Throughout, you also need gear. So you need, in this case, resources, templates, tools, as far as mentoring goes. And then practice, right? So for a mentoring program, that could look like the time that you actually put into it, which your mentors put into it, check-ins, keeping everybody accountable. And over time, if you allow it that structure, the teamwork will build. And so you're able to take one coach when you have 36 athletes, right, in a cheerleading example, and that one coach's influence can expand tenfold if you enable your athletes to kind of help do some of that work for you, right? And then at the end, you end up at your world championship competition. So a lot in the making, but there still can be mistakes. There will be mistakes. Some in your control, some in not. But really, the practice and the gear and all of the planning helps you prepare for that. So this is kind of something I thought that would wrap it all together, and you can think of and really visualize in your head as we talk about it. But yeah, so we're going to start off with the first case study. So I was lucky enough to be able to build a mentoring program. So really, it was a peer mentoring program. We named it as more of a shadowing program just for leadership's desires, but I was able to build it from scratch. So from the initial, okay, this is something we might want to do, all the way through, I believe we did 6 months about. So we started with zero budget. We knew we needed more engagement, feedback, people asking for more development opportunities, the need for global collaboration. So, as a global company, they were moving towards a really holistically global model. So, while some people maybe haven't been used to, handling aspects that maybe are attached to another country, they were going to be having to learn that. So, big growth opportunity for us, and we took it and ran with it. I was able to focus on three measurable goals. So just from leadership's wants and what I thought, would be feasible, was process efficiency, cross-functional collaboration, and strategic thinking. So that's in addition to wanting to provide that development opportunity, build that engagement as well. Awesome. So within, building my team, right? I really was lucky in the sense of the people team was the context, and they were very open to sharing in group settings. So I made sure to do group calls. I had monthly check-in calls. Um, we were able to really make sure that we set them up for success by being very intentional with our pairings and with our initial resources. So we got creative, and in this side, we did the mentors were able to do video day in the life vlogs. So that was one way we gave them more context. So when, mentees were coming in, they were able to pick who they wanted to pair up with and really have that information to make it sure it was a good pairing. We also curated the resources. So as blockers came up, as they were sharing on these calls, we were able to add in a reflection document, make sure that they had that goal setting framework and that they were all aligned moving forward. Um, this demonstrated, it must adapt to the unique context of participants. I believe everyone was super excited to have it, so that was really exciting and surprising, but I do not think that that's always the case. Awesome. So the next step was the practice aspect, right? So these cross-functional pairings with 14 people across different teams within the people team, so still different functions, not really interacting with each other every day. We had these check-ins monthly to make sure they were accountable, and we allowed them 3 months of whatever cadence they wanted to meet, and with the intention of finding, process inefficiencies, learning from each other, learning about different tools that they use, maybe that they hadn't considered. And over that time, they knew they had something to show for it at the end. So they were going to be asked to do a project. But even colleagues in India, we had one example where they were in the same office. They came in, they saw each other every day. This was the first time they expressed that they were really able to make that connection. And it was super valuable. And they learned so much just because even on a day-to-day of having that in-person connection, they weren't able to really learn from each other. So it really just showed how, breaking out that structure can allow for those silos to fade away and really allow us to connect with each other. So in the practice, the first phase was 3 months of meeting, learning about each other's roles, what they used, what they did. And phase two was going to be 2 months of applying what they learned in the sense of creating a project proposal for an innovation project. So this also aligned with, our company values, right? As a tech company, we wanted to align with the innovation and fast moving, breaking things, going quickly that HR and the people team aren't always able to uphold. Great. So, and a big part, so knowing that I was able to build it from the ground up, I was able to establish those metrics. So I interpreted what the leaders were wanting, what the people were wanting, and was able to specify certain metrics. I did a self-confidence measure at the beginning and at the end on 3 different areas that I had shown earlier, and to see how that changed. So this really proved the scalability. I mean, it shows significance. I'll have a visual in one moment. Uh, but across everything that they wanted, they were able to see that it really did have an impact. And this helped a lot for the first rendition, right? To know that there is potential there and it's worth putting our time and resources into. And for us, a self-confidence measure, 3 questions, that was enough. But there are tons of academic measures you can add in as well. Um, and I have some of those later on as well. But this is kind of the visual showing our data. I was super excited. You never know what you're going to get when you take data in the real world. And it's just a paired samples, t-test for the data people out there. But from the beginning to the end, process efficiency went up by 16%, cross-functional efficiency went up by 11%, and strategic efficiency went up by 26%. So really big jumps across all of those for such a small program and such a short amount of time. Um, it was super exciting to see, and we got tons of positive feedback just from participants getting to know, my company's buying into me and allowing me to develop in this way. They really all love the opportunity and we're super grateful. So this is just another kind of cherry on top, but it shows a really practical way that data can help build this mentoring story. So here are some of those measures that I had found, in my own research. Um, for your own reference, I'll have my slides shared, I believe, but in case you're needing more academic side of things, these are good places to start. Perfect. So once we went through, I did the post survey. We finished our capstone program. So they all presented their proposals on their innovation that they established by meeting to leadership. So it resulted in even one of their projects moving forward. So there was one that solved a major onboarding bottleneck, and was able to use a Slack automation to project a 50% reduction in the manual follow-ups they were having to do. So, huge win that would have never happened if we didn't take the time to slow down and connect with each other and learn from each other. It's proved that the program could elevate people, right? These are very OKR based scalable solution for a very low cost. We didn't have to bring in any external software. I think, doing it depending on your company's scale might require different tooling, but there's totally ways to do it in a cost-effective way. So it wasn't perfect. We had deductions is what I called it, but, or stunt, group drops. We had people drop out. We ran out of time with leadership presentations, but you really can't control everything. And we prepared enough that we were able to pivot and do, a group of three and things like that. So that's kind of the real world, example of what maybe something you learn that's perfect and glimmery in school. You got to make it work and be adaptable, but it still had an impact, so we persevered. So then I was able to, with my interest in, mentoring, my next role, I was able to take over mid kind of season for a mentoring pilot that we were running company-wide. It was around 12 sales and 12 engineering pairs mid-flight. I was responsible for helping the engineering pairs, but this was had already been running, the program had already been running for, I believe, like 1.5 months. So coming in was a lot different, right? I wasn't able to build my team roster. I wasn't able to plan my goals, make sure everyone was on the same page. I was having to come in and kind of see what had happened, where they were at, what was working, what wasn't, and I had to figure that out quick. This was also a whole other audience, right? So this was no longer the people team. It was engineers who have lots of different contexts, being both very busy and oftentimes having different personalities, right? So you have to approach them in different ways. But the practice, the mid-season is important. Without that kind of initial planning, though, it makes it really difficult to fully be able to achieve what you're wanting. So for drops, deductions, things that went wrong, communication blocks. So for the engineers, they preferred one-on-one communication. This was something that was very different from the people team. They are already overloaded with their day-to-day work, and they need you to prove that it's worth their time to buy in. So that effort, I did it. I went in, I did one-on-one calls, that was my only option in order to get any type of data collection. And we only really got post data because of that, but we were able to still at least get some of that, get it back on track. But knowing that the context varies is really important when you're looking to scale it. We struggled with participant buy-in, so they didn't have a capstone project at the end. There was really no end goal per se. I mean, they were able to set their own objectives and what they wanted, but I really weren't held to that standard, if that makes sense. So it's also with the lack of peer mentoring, I think the more traditional mentoring cycle meant that, busy coaches, if you're thinking about a team, were getting pulled into more tasks. So this made it really difficult, I think, for the mentees especially, to really learn and get what they wanted out of that program. So we also, the timing, I think a 3-month timeline, making sure it went right over the holidays, which really ended up not to be great. So I think thinking through what actually will work in terms of your company, very important. Also, sales timeline, engineer timeline, all very different. So a really important thing to consider, and I think could have been improved with more time for sure. And the tool, this was really platform centric, so we were trying out something, but there was really no matching capability with our tool. We did it, I think they did it on the back end more so, not being able to actually choose who you wanted to pair up with. It was just done for you. So this caused a lot of people to not get the correct pairing, not feel like, their wants were heard, and made it really difficult. So that among some other bugs, there was, times where they would get a notification that the relationship was terminated. That kind of undermined our trust for sure. So we had a lot of issues with the efficiency of the program, with, the ability for them to meet, as well as with their buy-in, right? If they're getting these different things, they're not going to believe that it's something that we value as well. So in addition to that, I think they tried to do more generic content, and it did not land. It was not relevant enough for the different teams, and they needed to feel like they were planned for to really buy in. So, what actually works across contexts? We looked at two different case studies. We have some of the situational context of our current world, what works. So I think the structure needs an endpoint, right? So that capstone or that championship moment of knowing that you're working towards something together and being held to that really helps. I don't think you can assume, one format fits all. I think you really have to be able to get feedback from people and be, detail oriented and knowing your context. So I think transparency and matching matters a lot. So something that they can own will mean much more than even the perfect match, right, that you do. I think giving them that area to make that choice makes them have more buy-in in the whole process. So peer mentoring reduces asks. So if managers are already stretched, right? Um, I think many people, you all have probably been in different situations where it's really difficult to get an executive and to get time on their calendar. So peer mentoring is a really, I think, easier way to work around that and still get that knowledge sharing, that um, intellect and just community that people are wanting and not getting as often. I think the data collection has to be built in with the process. So getting to see it from the start to the finish really helps. I think voluntary surveys, you have to make time for them to do it within it. That's something I noticed. If I didn't make time for, to do it while they were all together, it was never going to get done. So there's ways to work around, survey fatigue and things like that, but keeping it light and allowing time for it really did work. And the tool is a part of the experience. So whether you're doing something homegrown and using Google Sheets or you're trying to use a different platform, make sure you're thinking through that before you're already in it, right? You want to be planning for how that's going to work. All right. Perfect. And I think overall, peer mentoring is special because it creates that sense of safety, right? You're all at the same level. You can speak a little bit more transparently and honestly, and it allows more of these connections to happen because there's just more people that are willing to do it, right? So you're not having to function under the limits of executive availability. And you're not having to tiptoe around, maybe the politics of your company, right? It's a little bit easier of a lift for everyone involved, and still you're able to bring in all those things that you're learning from your manager, and make that impact amplify even further. So, and especially, for people maybe that aren't as extroverted or don't naturally build these networks like I do, this is a structured support, and it's doesn't take any type of, any specific personality or strength. It really helps facilitate that for you all as well. So it's something that allows everybody to get those benefits, maybe that they wouldn't have otherwise. So thank you all for listening. I'll take questions, and I have, to ponder is like a bit what obstacle has been the biggest and that you've experienced maybe or that you can imagine and join a mentoring program. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. But thank you.
Thank you, Haley. Um, I have plenty of questions to kind of fill in the dead spaces, so to speak, while everybody kind of noodles through, the different case studies, your data. So as a reminder, you're more than welcome to put your questions, comments in the chat, or you can raise your hand and come off mute if you'd like. So ponder. Like I said, I have plenty of questions because this was kind of one of my happy spots years and years ago, was building a mentor program. And maybe to start everybody off, um, is what was one of your learning lessons interacting with leadership? Whether it was getting time FaceTime with them or just having that conversation. What was one of the, one thing that really kind of hit you? Because there's not a whole lot of people, and I'll be more generalized with that, phenomena of individuals that really get leadership face time in, C-suite, especially C-suite when there's so many different levels. So what was your, biggest learning lesson talking with them?
Yeah, I think, for me, especially in that first program where I was given so much freedom, and autonomy and building that out, I think that visibility that I was given was a gift. And I was able to present and be in the room and have some of that FaceTime. And I was also just lucky enough to have a manager that was able to really articulate what their priorities were and translate that right into our day to day. So I think it's super important to think through like how it's going to work in terms of, executives are often pretty disconnected from the base and the day to day work, right? So having somebody to help you translate that is super important. And I think that's where that middle level management can be super influential.
And just so everybody knows, I will keep tossing some questions to Hailey until you guys either put something in the chat or, raise your hand. So I want to give you guys time to think, but I don't want to have a whole lot of, dead space where we're waiting. So please don't be afraid to just, you know,
Yes, we don't bite.
join in. So to kind of follow through on that, especially from a translation standpoint, that's another little pie in the sky that many um, many don't always understand, let alone have an opportunity to work with a manager, whether that manager is a VP level, director level, or a true, middle manager that still has another supervisor or manager underneath them. The translation, because we know it's hard to translate up, but
Yeah.
it's also very hard for that translation to go down the hierarchy. And in your conversations with your manager, um, what were some of the interesting uh, aspects of how your manager took some of the um, more, financial based or operational based, goals, and how did that translate down to what it would mean for you in building a mentor program?
Yeah, so for me, I think my manager was very operationally driven. So it was still a lot of back and forth. Like it didn't necessarily come super clear in a bow, right? I think throughout the process, we were able to create resources. We listed out our objectives. So I would say here, this is what I am hearing from our conversations thus far. What do you think? And we would go back and forth, and she'd be like, well, that's not what I wanted, or that's not what they said. And throughout those kind of iterations, we were really able to focus in. So I think it's a lot of asking the right questions and getting a common language to be able to really figure out what their true priorities are.
So one thing that came to mind when you were talking about the iterations, and that's not what I had in
Yeah,
mind. One, that's a really good key point about shared language. Um, but what the question is that came to mind is, did management, leadership, and again, I'm being a little bit more general in this question, did they really understand what the employees were saying in the surveys? And granted, I don't know if it was purely, quantitative or it was a mixed. Employees love having a mixed where they can put in their word-based comments, but was there a level of translation that you had to do to then explain to your manager, this is actually what the employees are saying, this is what they're meaning, and how does that equate, to what leadership wants?
definitely. I think as practitioners, it's really important to be able to find the overlap. So it's not necessarily that everything is going to overlap or that they have to understand every single thing, but finding those points, right? So when, they're talking about the engagement survey, they're getting a lot of feedback saying they want more development opportunities. Um, Leadership's taking that and they're like, well, I'm not sure what you want me to do about that. But they are also thinking, okay, we want to be, role planning, succession planning for if we have people, going out of roles, we want people to be training in those roles. So there's lots of like I don't know, back of the process thought that's going into it, in addition to kind of the KPI stuff, right? Like knowing that they wanted to increase efficiency and they wanted to work on their processes. So these are all things that the company and that is good for the business. But they're also things that by proxy, provide that engagement for the employees and provide that relationship building and personal development that's also going to go into the professional development. So I think it's a matter of finding that overlap so that, you're making sure that it is benefiting both sides, because I think that's how you make it sustainable, right? Even if it's not full one-to-one.
So that was another one of my questions, is that sustainability, and the stark difference between your two different case studies is probably pretty common, because your case study number two is kind of the more common, unless you have a very
Really.
well built, well supported mentor program, and you have leadership at all levels of being a people manager that support it. And so one of my other questions is around um, sorry, I'm trying to figure out my
Yeah, take it.
phrasing. So if you want, so if you entered the second case study, your second mentor program in the middle, um, and you kind of saw disaster happening, so to speak. Did you have an opportunity to kind of hit pause and do a little bit of reorganizing, doing a little bit of cleaning house, or were you just given, here's your path and you need to stick with that path? And there's a bit of a part two to that of was that engineering specific mentor program, was that based off of what you have put together for the people team, or was that someone else kind of, I'm going to give this a try and kind of just come from their perspective?
Yeah, so that was more of a company initiative, right? It was something that they're wanting to do at a wider scale. So it was something I believe, the team was super stretched. So I definitely don't blame anyone in particular. But I think when you're trying to do something at scale like that, there are more room, more aspects that will lead to error. So I think it being at scale in that sense meant that you had one program manager, but then you also had, each particular organization and they have somebody that is also helping, but nobody because of that is owning it fully. So the ownership,
Mhm.
I think, really led to some miscommunication and just difficulties in keeping everything on track, um, especially without, that structure of the end goal or any of those things that were built along the way. I think it really was a pilot and we were trying it out to see what it would look like. And I think we found out, and I think the tool especially was their focus. But I think in order to, build something to fruition, like I'm sure that they would want to do, it would require just more planning, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, AJ, see you're on camera, so please go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep,
I
sure
can.
can.
I really appreciate the presentation, Haley. Just a quick question. I think you mentioned this kind of at the top of the hour. You were talking about how organizations have become flatter, and that makes collaboration a lot easier. But I think that might also be kind of a double-edged sword in that for like mentoring purpose, you might be looking for folks that are higher in that hierarchy so that they can kind of guide you along the way to create some of that power distance and say, this is where I want to be. So I guess from your perspective, how is the organizational flattedness kind of flattening out their mentoring relationships? Are people kind of shifting more to that peer-based model and getting more from that, or are they kind of maybe setting expectations for that traditional mentoring relationship that's just a little bit less frequent in today's flatter organizations?
Yeah, from my experience in conversations, peer mentoring is not seen as something, super high value. I think people are used to the traditional mentoring structure of having a senior and then someone less senior. Um, I'm not sure why. I think maybe there's, some use for it and some truth in it, right? Of knowing that someone has some more to show because they've had more experience. I think that's kind of the assumption you're operating under.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, definitely with the flatter structure, it makes it much more difficult to get that. And I also think it's, with that structure and with the world that we're in, there's a paradox of you're having more learning demands being placed on you. You're not having those interactions as much, and your manager or your mentor, whichever it is stretched even further, right? So a lot of things are kind of working against it. So for me, when I was coming across, peer mentoring and even able to see it at in my last role, it just made so much sense as something that I think we could all learn from and value and see a lot of positive things come from. So I'm hoping that it's, something that's going to be shifting towards that because I don't really see our organizational structure changing a whole lot, right, in this world with so many new technologies and learning's going to keep going. So I'm hoping to see that people can kind of be a part of that.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think the only thing that I'll add is just restate that the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. So maybe it's more about kind of setting expectations that are more realistic with today's reality than it is kind of forcing something that may no longer exist. So thank you so much. That was a really great response.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Thank you, AJ. Lynette has a really good question. Uh, she writes, would you agree that a mentorship program for an entire company should allow for nuances between each organization? Maybe a clarification for me and even Hailey there, Lynette, is the nuances between each organization. Is that, say internal, if there's different subsidiaries, different brands, or
Mm.
is it truly from, McDonald's to Burger King? So that would be kind of the better understanding of what you mean by nuances.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the the different organizations, marketing, sales, engineering.
Mhm.
And if you have I hate to say this, but cookie cutter program that says, okay, this is how we're going to run this mentorship program for all orgs, sales, marketing, engineering.
Right.
Is it realistic to think that the people within those orgs, if they're that they would want to be mentored in the same way or have different needs? Um, I can tell
Yeah.
you, sorry, it's sort of a quick trick question, Hailey. um, we work together. She, but and like for instance, engineering is a very unique group of people, and um, right. Um, and I mean, Hailey, maybe you can elaborate more on what I'm.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, definitely. I think, yeah, when you look at a company, right, it's kind of same with the metaphor, right? Even with, a cheer team, everybody's going to be different. There's different roles in it. You have to think about everyone differently. And I can bring this back up, but I think there are ways to account for that. I think if you're building in, right, I mean, knowing that the communication style is going to change, you can alter that without altering, the bones of the program. So, as long as you have that initial planning, I think you're able to have maybe a standout person who is championing that group, right? That is able to flex to their communication needs, especially, or to their gear needs, right? Their resource needs. Um, I think you're able to flex that if you have just a basic structure, and I don't think that changes the entire integrity of the program. But definitely something to consider and super important as well, and when looking at the effectiveness of what you're wanting to do. Awesome. Are there any questions?
So I'm trying to put the visual into words of working with the different departments. From my time, I call them departments rather than organizations. And thank you for clarifying that, Lynette. And even I would add to that of how you would work with union employees is an added bonus at times to where some want a little bit of both, opportunities of doing that one-on-one time versus some need that group to have a little bit of that self-confidence to be able to speak up. And maybe another question to really look at kind of the data collection aspect. Were there certain ways that you found that, whether it was during your one-on-one interviews or just from a survey, that you found the richer data? Because sometimes there's ways you can kind of see from a qualitative side of a survey of, I'm not quite sure if that's accurate, just because it seems a little too kind of rote, too similar from everything else. So I'm just kind of curious from a interactive with the employees of how did that feel for you to interact with them? How did that feel for them? And it was any of their feelings important to share with leadership in explaining how well, especially from the people mentor program that you ran, because sometimes sharing that feeling can go along with the data, especially with the improvements that you saw with the first people program. So curious.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think being involved from start to finish meant that I had a lot of that understanding of their feelings, from the qualitative feedback I was getting, just even in the check-ins, right? I was more involved in that process for sure in the first case study versus the second case study. I was having to kind of manufacture it myself. But we got a lot of qualitative feedback because of that, I think. It was just condensed into, that one-on-one meeting versus before it was stretched amongst the whole process, and we were able to kind of reroute as it was going. So that the feelings for sure, we were able to pass along to leadership, and it was super important because they were able to take that and understand, the issues with the tool, and really be able to know how it would work if they wanted to do it again, right? So at this stage, I think we are going back to the drawing board in terms of trying to find another platform that works. But we wouldn't have known that if we did not collect that feedback from everybody. So it's definitely something they still wanted. People were excited about it, or they say they want it, but I think that accountability piece and other things can be built in. So that's what they were able to do, at least with the feedback so far. And I know in terms of the initial one, there was different things. I think next year or in future renditions, they're wanting maybe more understanding that it's a two-way street. I think we kind of built it with a lot of flexibility in mind. So we were able to take that and document it and make sure that they would have it for future renditions. We also, even with it being more of a shadower type situation, there still was some fatigue, right? So you have to kind of understand that you're putting maybe more weight on someone, and that's going to have consequences. And we also had thought, at the end of it, we would have liked to put midpoint data collection as a priority. So getting that to, guide our progress, understanding where you're at in the middle to have those numbers really helps to add on to the qualitative feedback that we were already getting. So there's tons of opportunities to expand. I believe, futures participants could start to build an alumni, right? Or have a whole community of its own. So there was lots of really great feedback and ideas that our leadership was super excited to hear. So I was glad we collected it.
So one clarifying question is the job shadowing. Why was that so important for leadership? And then how did you translate that into more of a mentoring program, mentoring structure? But just curious of why job shadowing was so important.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I think that since it was something we were doing pretty ad hoc, on a smaller team, our team, I believe the entirety of it was around 40-ish people. So much smaller group. We didn't want it to be something that would get confused as a company-wide initiative, right? This was pretty internal for us. So I'm sure that was part of it. I think something like job shadowing maybe had less formality to it than, a mentoring program might. I also think maybe it would, be a little bit less intimidating to say, okay, well, we're just going to job shadow each other, versus mentoring, I think implies a little bit more weight to it. I do think peer mentoring takes off a lot of that pressure, but I think regardless, there's connotations with the word. So for them, they felt like job shadowing was a really great way to approach it. And in an aspect, it was, right? If we were wanting to really teach each other about what we do on our day to day, and I think we did lean heavy into that aspect. But I think it's the same goal of the knowledge sharing and the innovation that peer mentoring can also provide.
Interesting. And that kind of can lead into they kind of know their teams, their people, how they think to where, you know, reducing that formality would bring a little bit more, inclusion to the participation. And so maybe something on closing is what would be your recommendation if someone else has exactly, Raven, less extroverted, that would be more opening and more welcoming.
Yeah.
What would be your recommendation for someone that would be in a similar opportunity? You're working with your manager and you get FaceTime with leadership, whether that's, C-suite, maybe it's a, big divisional leadership that's, still big, but maybe not quite so the C-suite. Just curious of what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, in the essence of mentoring and relationship building, ask for help. So I did not just do this all on my own, right? I had the leadership, but I also asked, some of my academic resources. I bounced ideas off for surveys to make sure I was capturing the right information. I asked questions like, can I have access to performance data? Newsflash, no. You're probably not going to get that most of the time. But hey, it's being bold enough to ask and know that, whatever it is, you have a lot to bring to the table. And you are an expert in lots of areas, and people will really be open to that, if you allow yourself to do it. So, yeah, I think asking for support and also just really owning it, always goes a long way.
Thank you, Haley. No, this was fun. One of my favorite topics. So any lasting comments, questions? Yes. Trial and error, for engineering. Yes. Very,
Yes.
very correct. So any last questions or comments for Haley?
I think we're good.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for joining, Lynette. All right, if that is it, thank you everyone for being here tonight and jumping in and listening in to Haley and mentoring.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you so much. Thank you, Haley. Thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and I hope you'll check out our YouTube page. And for the previous speakers we've had we've had some great speakers on some great topics, and be looking next month for our next topic. We always look for an applied lens to bring IO topics, or IO related topics at least, to the world, to you guys, that you can take to get more tools for your toolbox to use in your everyday lives. So I hope that you'll check that out. Pam has helpfully put the link in the chat, and as I said, we started Hailey's tonight's recording will be added to the YouTube page usually by the end of the week, depending on how busy our week is. So I hope you'll check that out and share that with others who may be interested. So again, thank you so much, Hailey. I appreciate you so much jumping in here and sharing your experience with us. It was very, very interesting. So thanks. And I wish all of you a good night. Lynette, you have something?
No, I was just saying good night. Thank you.
Oh, good night.
Yes, thank you.
And last reminder, please take a moment to answer the survey at the end if you would. We'd appreciate it. So thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.